You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Here for the Truth podcast. I'm Joel Rafidi. I've got my co-host Yerasimos in the house. As always, this is episode 108, and we have Eyla Cuenca returning. She first joined us back in episode 22 with my wife, Eyla Rafidi, in fact, where we talked about the medicalisation of birth and the importance of home births. But today we're looking at the psychology of birth. And this is a very important conversation around trauma, around infertility, around conscious conception, and a lot more, which I think you guys will get a lot of value out of. Right before we get into that, our private membership community, Friends of the Truth. To learn more about that, you can head to friendsofthetruth.co to connect with us and to connect with other amazing individuals, all supporting each other through what's an incredible community. You get 3 live calls a month. You get to get personal with some of our podcast guests, and it's just a really awesome space. So friendsofthetruth.co if you want to get deeper. Rise Above the Herd round 5 will be opening shortly for those interested, and we'll be making an announcement on that later. Guys, much love. Enjoy this episode. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Here for the Truth podcast. This is episode 108 with the amazing Eyla Cuenca returning. She's a birth doula and birth educator, and she has been red pilling human beings all around the planet on the truth around birth for a very long time. She last joined us in episode 22. You can go check that one out for a deep dive or an introduction into this subject. Eyla, it's a pleasure to have you back. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here with you guys.
Yeah, what's new in your world?
What is new in my world? Well, I'm in the midst of a doula training. So I have a really wonderful cohort of 10 women, and that's been a fun ride. We started off the year 2023 with this training and this mentorship, and it is amazing to see all of these women come together from all over the world.
Yeah. And
like with this common thread, of wanting to uncover this process, so of birth and this transition,
Yeah. So on the previous episode, we focused pretty heavily on the medicalisation of birth. But I want to kick this one off on preparing for birth, because most people just enter this process already pregnant. But when we really consider this with intention and how much factors into the health of a baby even pre-birth, how do we start that conversation?
Well, I'd say that there's just this generic focus on nutrition and perhaps a basic list, basic framework of the boxes to check, right? Finding a good provider and, maybe taking a class and, creating a birth plan. Those are all kind of the basics that we use to guide us. But I'd like to take it back a lot further. If we have the opportunity to consciously conceive, there's a whole world there for the man and the woman to explore. There is an opportunity to do the self-inquiry, each of them individually, and then also, coming together as a partnership, what is the self-inquiry we're going to do together? So there's these 3 things happening at once, when you're consciously conceiving, or you can walk that route. And a lot of that looks like addressing your own birth. And I do talk about this a lot because we go into this space of pregnancy and birth with a lot of limiting beliefs, and the way that we kind of suppress them or cope with them is by busying ourselves with the baby shower, the epidural, all the things that kind of keep us up here and in high control, deep control over the situation. But when we go into surrender, that's when we can start to access what's under here. What are the limiting beliefs? What am I feeling? What am I sensing? And so I like to invite couples to just go into that space of self-inquiry, if they have that capacity before they conceive, if it's not planned, then they're in the pregnancy and they can do that as well. So I've been doing a lot since I talked to you guys last. I've been doing a lot of birth trauma processing with women and men. And just going back to their own experience and kind of reevaluating, what they used to believe as truth, right? Or the story they got and they start to look at their patterning. And I say this is an opportunity for a pattern disruptor. This is an opportunity for us to, like, maybe what you experienced or what you thought you experienced didn't really happen. And how can we change that? And as people start uncovering their arc since their own birth, they feel much more prepared for this experience to do it on their own. And they forget about all of, like, what I call the busyness of, like, the prenatals and the classes and they go deeper into what's actually holding them back from surrendering to this.
So what are some of those key stories or limiting beliefs?
Limiting beliefs, right? So one of the big ones I've been working with the last 6 months are with men. Like, I'm not going, like, they don't have the framework for fatherhood. They feel like they don't know how to enter the space of being a father. And they're kind of like, well, I'm just a spectator, and whatever my partner needs, whatever my wife needs, like, I'm just going to support her in it, So there's a limiting belief, perhaps like maybe a father wound there of, not having the template and then not having the confidence to then give that, and not believing that they can do it. And so when we go back to their birth and we go back to the adolescence, we just look at, like, kind of the lapse in where they felt that framework wasn't being shown to them, and some of them did have absentee fathers, right? And so they grew up with a lot of women showing them how to move through the world. And so they say, oh no, but I had a really, enriched upbringing, and I was really safe, and I had a lot of love. And I'm like, yeah, but there is this masculine template that is not there. And so how can we build that now? First, we acknowledge that it wasn't there. And now, like, through building community, through brotherhood, through healthy male relationships, through finding a mentor, through understanding hierarchy, right, in masculinity, and, like, where to seek support, and not seeking support from your partner. She's not your mommy, she's your wife. Like, and so just kind of giving everyone roles really helps them build the confidence to show up as a father, in this process. Yeah.
So, like, what is, in your opinion? I mean, obviously, I'm a father of 2 daughters myself. I found myself, quite uncertain in the earlier years. Like, obviously, it's interesting because when the baby is born, particularly with the firstborn, like, that's you're no longer your wife's priority, and I think that's what a lot of men deal with and they grapple with. And you go into thinking you're going to be doing everything together, all the same things together, you're going to have the same relationship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in my experience, that's simply not the case. And what takes place is the man and the woman from that point have to go through an individuation process because they're deeply bonded up until then. And then, like, the third entity, being the baby, enters the picture, and there's a new dynamic that's born. So, like, what is the ideal role of the father in those newborn years, in your opinion?
Yeah, I just want to interject there. It's so important what you said. Like, you mentioned third body, or, third presence, right, as the baby, but really, like, there was a third presence before the baby, which was like the eros, right? What the man and the woman came together to create, which is this third body. And so there has to be sort of what I call, like, a grief processing of that transforming. So that's kind of closing, and it's going to be reborn as something else. There's going to be another version of that. So there has to be an acknowledgement that that's closing. And a lot of people don't do that. They're like, wait, I want you back. I want to get that back. And there is no getting that back. There's only an opportunity for something even deeper and different, right? Yeah. So there's that component and that journey to be taken together. And so, we could go into the more, like, anthropological and biological, like, role playing that happens, with a new father and a new mother, but I'll kind of stick to this for now, and then we can go into that. The individuation process that you're talking about, when there's this kind of resentment that can start to build when that individuation doesn't happen, it's because there was an imbalance to begin with, often. Right, in the roles, and there were not defined roles, and there, like I mentioned before, there was kind of this codependency that exists, with many couples, and maybe there was a role the woman was filling that kind of fills, like, that need for the mommy, right, for example, or, like, the woman, she might have that, like, dark mother archetype that feels like she has to control the man and course correct him all the time in order for her to feel safe, right? And so when all of that starts to kind of fall apart, and then you have this baby, it's like, oh, like, that dark mother energy I was putting on him, now I have to figure out how to, like, heal that, transfer that, do something so that now I'm available for my child. And then like they see that the glue that was kind of holding them together was just like a bunch of projection and a bunch of like wounding, right? Of course, there can be love there, but this is an opportunity to say like, okay, let me reassess like where my needs are being met and how and why, and, if I truly love someone there, I know that they're on their own path. And so there is this kind of like assessment that has to happen of like, I love you and I hold on loosely and we come together when we can, right? And we create a plan for how to do this, but like, I'm not here to control you and you're not here to control me. And like, we have to figure out what our roles are. And so some people can access that, if they really consciously move into it. And some people, end up separating, divorcing, like childbirth really brings that out. It really causes one. It's like a hall of mirrors, And so, yeah, this is a great opportunity in the pregnancy to step into that, because once the child is there, as you know, Joel, like it moves fast and it's like intense and it's like all the time,
Yep.
So I would say that, the father, when he can really figure out what brings him joy and he can really tap into his purpose and he can really see his essential role as provider and leader of the family, like, and the woman can really allow him to be there and thrive in that space and give him meaning and value in that space, it starts to really balance the scales and everyone starts to feel really settled and surrendered and their nervous system can, like drop in and things unfold naturally. But when there's a compensation and there's a confusion about the roles, that's when, it's tricky. So we start to confuse that in the labor process and in the pregnancy process. And, women are making plans like, oh, I'm going back to work after 4 weeks. And then the man's like, I'll stay home with the baby. And then, there's a lot that starts to happen that really energetically confuses the family.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I'm like, I've noticed there's resentment that builds on the woman's side as well. Like, oh, you get to go to work, you get to have time by yourself,
Right.
that kind of thing as well. And so what's the resistance on the mother's side on that end?
Well, I think in the individuation process that you mentioned that both people are going through, like, I often find that the woman hasn't found her worth, right? As an individual, she hasn't really embodied her worthiness. And we all have worthiness, right? But she hasn't embodied it. So for her to feel valuable and worthy, she has to also be participating in society the way that she was before, right? It's like having the job, showing up, contributing financially, climbing that ladder, so to speak. And so she'll say, well, like now I'm home with the baby, and like, is this as valuable? Is this as valuable? Like he's out making the money, he has the freedom, and so she views this process sometimes as like an incarceration or a restriction. And that's really like when women have not, it's hard because society doesn't really value the role of motherhood as like a top professional role to fill,
When did that, like, the shift happened, because I feel like we're coming back to that now as you see people maybe wanting to go to more traditional ways of being. But when did the role of motherhood lose its, I don't know, importance, where it was like, oh, you're just that, you're just a mother. You know what I mean? And we've moved to this place where it was like focusing. And I'm not saying women shouldn't go after what they want in their work and their careers, but it's just like what you said, it's just like it's not important. We don't place this importance and value on who is ultimately nurturing the future.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's the entire like feminism psyop that has been like slowly weaving itself into our society for many decades, and I'm not exactly sure at this point, like where the origin of that, stems from. However, I would say really like when we started shifting away from tribal life is when that became a thing. I think organically that's when it became a thing because women now moved into cities where in order to be in the city, there was a cost, right? There was a price to pay to be there. And there was a currency that everyone had to have, like the dollar, right? Like, let's just say, in our country, like they had to participate in society in a certain way, which did not allow them to commune and it did not allow them to play the role that they were playing before in a tribe, right? Because like in a tribe, all the women come together, they breastfeed each other's children. I'm really generalizing here, like cross-culturally, this is what it could look like, in a tribe of 60 people, like all the women would breastfeed each other's children, they would all birth together, they would all care for the children. So you could step away for a time and you would know that your child is being cared for as if it was the child of those women, right? With the same love, attention, and intention that we all need to do this. We all need to come together so that this tribe survives, right? And so the men had their role and the women had their role. And we live together, right? And so then when we move into these cities, we're living in these little pods. The women don't have the same support. They don't know who to trust. Everyone is kind of like under review. You don't know if that person has your same value system. So you wouldn't leave your kid there and you're not hanging out with them. And it's like, that's how we started to splinter. And women, women say yeah, I work with a lot of women who've been divorced, and they're single moms now. And they say, it's not about the money. If I got more money, it wouldn't make any difference. What I need is the community, I don't need more dollar bills. I need the woman living next door to me. And then the woman on the other side that can come and see me and support me and reflect back to me and hold my children too, And so I would say that, it's been happening slowly over time as we've moved out of this tribal model and, and then more kind of violently and intensely in the last 200 years, where women were made to believe that their worth was financial contribution and their worth had a lot to do with being equal to men. Right. And, we're not the same. Right. I'm sure you guys have talked about this with many guests you've had. It's we're just not the same. And we got confused about that.
I mean, the reality is if anyone's looking to society to reflect their value back to them, it's a very unstable and shaky foundation to begin with, like man or woman,
Of course. And I see
it. The truth is it's the most valuable role. It's the most worthwhile role. It's the most important role. So it's how do we reclaim that without having to need that mirrored back to us by a society that's obviously inherently unwell?
Of course. And one of the things that continues to perpetuate that cycle of women even rejecting birth, but then feeling this biological instinct to do it, right? But they reject it on this psychospiritual level. A lot of that has to do with trauma from their own birth, right? A lot of women say I don't want to have a child. The thought of it is repulsive to me. It's uncomfortable. It makes me sick. It makes my body hurt. And it's well, let's look at your own birth experience and how did your mother talk about birth? So now all these traumatic births are influencing a woman's desire to even participate in that model. So that's kind of coming from every angle, of course,
Yeah. Yeah. So how important is the environment in which a baby is conceived? And as well as the mother's, psycho-emotional well-being at the time of conception?
Oh my God, it's so important. It's so important. I would say yeah, sure, conscious intention is really wonderful, but I believe that there's contracts already in place and we're already calling in these souls at the right time that they're supposed to come in. So, of course, there's let's conceive tonight, and then there's also oops, it happened, right? And either one is totally perfect and the way that it's supposed to be. However, many women have not yet addressed a lot that's going on within them, within their relationship. There isn't radical honesty about the partner that they're with. There isn't radical honesty about their own relationship to themselves, And so I would say that a lot of these pregnancy complications, and Yerasimos, you might know a little bit about this in your studies with German New Medicine and your exploration of that. But I just started this course on pregnancy complications through the scope of German New Medicine. And I'm I'm grasping, I've been going slowly through it, and I'm okay, I think I comprehend 30%. It's just so intricate and dense and incredible. But so many of these pregnancy complications come from a woman actually rejecting this role of motherhood and feeling this, what we could call a separation conflict within her own pregnancy, wanting the space, actually feeling now invaded, feeling now that she's being taken over, she's being hijacked. And that comes from something way before the pregnancy. It's not the pregnancy itself, And so when a child is growing in a womb where the mother is feeling this on a subterranean level, perhaps, there's a sense of rejection that fetus grows up feeling, it develops feeling. That's its nourishment. It's like, I'm here, but I'm not really wanted. I'm here, but maybe I was a mistake. I'm here, but mommy, isn't available to me energetically, right? Like, we're such intelligent beings. And, on the outside, maybe the mother's doing all the things, but on the inside, there's like this dread almost of like my worthiness as a mother, like, I don't have time to myself. My body's being taken over. Like, this doesn't feel good. And, that's something that really influences the child. And then we see it develop into some severe pregnancy complication. And it's like, well, I was eating all the things. I eat organic. Like, I don't do that. I do this, and I'm eating protein, and I'm doing my yoga. And so I don't understand why now suddenly, like, I'm having issues with my adrenal glands, or like, I have preeclampsia, or, things like that. Like mystery, complications, right? So I would say the psycho-emotional environment of the mother is like paramount, if not the most important thing.
Yeah. I mean, I would have to agree with you there just in general. And we've talked about this before so many times on this show and in different areas, but like, you can't leave consciousness at the door. It's like, oh, I ticked off the boxes. I eat the right foods, and I didn't go through these medical procedures. I didn't do this, that, the other. And yet what is going on, in your psyche? How is that impacting you? How is it impacting this being that's growing during that 9-year period? And I may have even brought this up before, but I remember when I was at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition like 15 years ago, it was like a nutrition program, but we were getting into some esoteric subjects, and somehow the conversation turned to the psychological state of a mother and how it impacts the child. And this one woman got up in the classroom. It was like 1,000 people in this large hall that were teaching the classes, and she's like, my entire life I felt like I didn't belong. I grappled with suicide, all these different things, and then one day I was talking to my aunt, and my aunt told me that my mother wanted to abort me during the whole pregnancy. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that level of intention and the psychology behind it and how it influences the child. And you bring up German new medicine, and yeah, there's so many factors that could be going on while the baby's in the womb.
Right.
Even things that have to do with large sounds or some of the medical procedures and how they impact the child, and of course what conflicts are going on with the mother and how that impacts the child as well. And so, I think even in the alternative world, we want to like blame vaccines for every single thing that goes wrong, or blame like a certain, lack of a nutrient. And yet we don't highlight this very, very important thing on how the perception of our environment. First, obviously the mother, but then this child is in an environment within the mother during this period and navigating life, and so there's so many
Yeah.
factors.
Oh yeah. And no, that's really brilliant what you said, and apart from like her psycho-emotional terrain, whatever she's experienced in her life, we look at the bigger picture of the environment she lives in and how that's impacting her every day. And I'm not talking about like chemtrails and EMFs. I'm talking about like a case study I just looked at where, a woman in a war-torn country in Yemen, right? So there is drought, famine, and starvation, right? And so she developed a starvation conflict, which affects the liver and the gut, and developed hepatitis B, and then passed it to her baby, right? And so for those of you not really familiar, I mean, I don't know if you want to go into Yerasimos, how these things happen in Germany.
Anyone who's, yeah, and I'm not an expert by any means. We've had Melissa on 3 times on this show, and we touch upon in other things. But I mean, if anyone wants to, if you want to share anything, then share it. They can go to previous episodes. They can look it up online.
I guess we could just reference them there. But the point is that this mystery disease appeared, right? And it was like, I've never had contact with someone who has that virus. I've never, you know what I mean? And it was something that developed in the pregnancy, because the whole time she was pregnant, she was wondering if there was going to be food, because there was one day, but there wasn't the next day. Would there be water? And this becomes a starvation conflict of like, okay, let's overeat one day because we don't know. And also like the adrenaline and the cortisol that is constantly like spiking and dropping in these situations affects the baby, right? So we see babies even born with adrenal fatigue when the mother is in fight or flight throughout her pregnancy. So on a hormonal level, psychospiritual level. And then if we look at these really cool experiments I've just been looking at that Veda Austin did. I don't know if you guys are familiar. I think you are, but
yeah, I've heard.
Yeah, so it's just like the molecular structure of water is changing based on the nearest body of water, right? And so like the woman is made up of water, the baby is in water, the baby is made up of water, there's water within the baby as well. And so they start to attune to the mother's molecular structure and her frequency. That's just the way that it works with water. And so there's so many systems in place. There's so many elements happening all the time that like when we start to think like, oh, did I take my prenatal today? It's like, that is like kind of irrelevant,
That's
So,
I completely understand. And like obviously that's an extreme example. But like
sure.
in general, like is this a lot of pressure on a woman to be so perfectly psychically and emotionally clean before I even think about having a baby? Like does that factor in at all? Like when's the perfect time to have a baby when my environment's perfect, when like, I've done all my shadow work and I've done all the inner child healing, like
for me, it's like new level, new devil every day.
Yeah.
So I don't know about that. I don't think that there is like a state that we're trying to get to. I think it's in the state of receptivity that we're in, and the state of awareness that we are constantly in a new level, new devil situation, and that we're available to transform. I think the availability to transform is actually what keeps us in the healthiest state and keeps our terrain in balance, is the availability to transform. Not so much being in the state of a realized transformation and just knowing that it's going to continue to unfold. It's the resistance to the transformation that creates the conflicts and creates the illnesses,
Yeah. And I think also too is like, it's up to the individual to be like, okay, this is information. How can I take this in and not let it overwhelm me and go, okay, cool. Like this is some new awarenesses that I have and I'm going to do the best I can. And then life's life, you know what I mean? There's things that we can't control, but what can we do to maybe make things easier or potentially easier? And, this is where like ignorance isn't bliss, in a sense where it's like people like this is where self-responsibility comes in. And this goes beyond just like we're talking about the topic of childbirth, just how to live a better life, how to be more empowered, how to have more knowledge. It's like, are you going to let all the devils, all the evil things that are going on in the world, like you're just going to stick your head in the sand or face it head on heroically and go, okay, cool. Let's see what happens. I'm going to do what I can, but then I got to keep moving through and do things in life. And, I don't have control over everything.
Yeah.
One
has to have their consciousness geared towards evolution, right? But when we can look at all our circumstances, everything that happens in our life as a utility to evolve one's consciousness, then everything has its gifts and its benefits. But it's a very painful process as well. Like for myself, like Alyssa and I weren't perfect when Valley was born or when Naya was born, nor are we perfect now by any degree whatsoever.
right.
But I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, our greatest healing and work has come about through the process of having children. It's forced all the shadows and demons out in our relationship to be addressed and to be dealt with when you're on this path of conscious evolution. It's forced me to build a business, to become an entrepreneur. It's forced me to step into, a level of being that I'd never thought I was capable of pre being a father. So it's what's the attunement of your awareness? Are you willing to take everything in, face the darkness, face the pain, and use that to evolve and to grow?
Yeah. And like, a simple question one could ask themselves if they want to start this point of inquiry, right? It's like one of the main ones we talk about is like, why do I believe that I need the epidural? Like just as an example, right? Because women say, well, it's, I don't want to feel pain. Why should I suffer? And I've been told that like birth is suffering, and why would I want to put myself through suffering? Right. And so I say, okay, let's talk about holding discomfort in the body. If what is our capacity to hold discomfort? Our capacity to hold discomfort is equal to our capacity to hold pleasure, right? So as much discomfort that you can hold, that's the amount of pleasure you can hold. It's like that. And so we start to do an exploration of what it means to hold things in the body. And then that's when they start to see like, oh, we do these processes together, like, oh, I just remembered like an event I had in adolescence that I haven't thought about in a really long time. And that was when I decided I didn't want to feel in my body anymore, and it can be just like that. Like it can happen in 20 minutes just to follow this line of inquiry as to like, what is behind this desire to check out for the birth. Right. And it can open up this whole world and say like, oh, I wanted to dig into the dirt and never think about it again. But I guess this is an opportunity, because if I don't do it now, it's going to come up when I have a daughter, because she's going to be 12 when, I was 12 and I had the event. And so I'm going to have to deal with it again eventually, so it never escapes you. And, and if we look at this as the death of the maiden and the birth of the mother, right. Or like the death of like the knight, birthing into the king, it's like, that's what this process can be for people. But there's a level of self-responsibility that has to be had. And it's not as complicated as we think. It's not like you have to go into this like deep cave for many years and become a hermit to prepare yourself for this process. Like sometimes it can be like quick processing and acknowledgement of certain limiting beliefs,
I don't believe there's any coincidence to the genders that are sent to us either.
No, I agree. Totally. Yeah. And, Yerasimos, we had talked a little bit about free birth and, like all the different options available to us. And I have found that like this conversation we're having right now about limiting beliefs and, taking ownership over, what I would say is like divided will, really comes into play with a lot of the women I've worked with who've free birthed. And for those of you who don't know what it is, it's really just an option for birthing where you don't have medical intervention. It's like as low intervention as possible. A lot of people choose to, just labor at home or wherever they are, walk out into the woods, like you said, your friend did, and just let the process unfold naturally, right? But I have worked with a lot of women who say like, okay, I'm going to hire a midwife, because I really want a free birth, but there's like a part of me that wants to hire a midwife just like in case something happens, maybe with the newborn. And so they have the midwife, like this is one example, waiting in the car. So the midwife waits in her car, and then the couple's in the house, and she doesn't want to doula. She doesn't doulas or interventions too. And, I just like, I can't be at the hospital. I'm not going there. There's no way, and the labor starts to unfold, and the woman's feeling like, okay, like when is this really going to take off, right? And this was an example of someone I worked with recently, and kind of similar. There's many echoes of this story of people I've worked with, and the woman starts to feel a lack of being held, lack of support, starting to resent the midwife, like starting to resent the husband, starting to feel like, where is everybody, and like, why is this taking so long, and not being able to hold this experience in her body. And then something happens in the labor, like maybe it stalls, or maybe she doesn't dilate, or maybe, she starts bleeding. There's like some complication that arises, and she goes to the hospital, and like, she's greeted by this team of nurses who are like, hey, we're your support team, and suddenly the woman is like, oh, like there's people here holding me, and dilates quickly, labor progresses quickly, baby's born, and there's this, like what I say, it's like this divided will where it's like, you wanted the support, you wanted the attention, you wanted that sensation of being held. And there was something like cerebrally, there was like this rejection of this system or of this support because you felt like you had to do it this way. And so you just end up back in the arms of the thing that you thought you were rejecting, and I see this happen a lot. So I would say like, preparing for the birth, you want to be really honest about what your needs are. And like, why do we need to make the hospital wrong for the home birth to feel right? Or like, why do we need to make the hospital wrong for like the free birth to feel right? Or like, why do we have to make anyone wrong in order to feel right? Because it's just another form of victim consciousness. And so I do see that a lot with free birth. Obviously, there's many successful free births, but I find that there's often this divided will that comes up, and that rejection of the system, the rejection of the conventional model is kind of like the other side of the same coin of someone who goes like into the polar opposite of like, no intervention, no support, just me. Like, I don't need anyone. And it's like, well, women don't really birth alone. They never have, So what is this idea that like you're supposed to be alone somewhere? That's not how we're built. So,
yeah. And again, I think this conversation keeps coming back to, again, the consciousness and the psychology. Like, you can be presented with these ideas and attached to them and go, this is what I'm going to do. But yet there's something else simmering underneath, other parts of you that want other stuff. Like, even like the example you gave, there's a part of a woman that wanted to be supported but didn't have access to it, and was just operating from this place of, no, I did this thing, I'm part of this group, I took this class, again, I don't know this person, and so this is the decision I'm going to make, and that's it. Now, it could work out. I mean, I know people where it has, and it's gorgeous and beautiful, and yet there are other sides to the story as well.
Yeah, there's just another dimension to that world of free birth, and I would say, like, if you're considering it, it's like really evaluate why you're considering it. Like, what about it is offering you everything that you need? And if you're feeling like you're doing it because there's a rejection of the other options, like, this is an opportunity to explore the rejection of those other options, right? If you're rejecting home birth and you have to be in a hospital, like, what's there? There's always something there. And whatever we reject, there's always something there. There's always a part of us that sees something in that model that is like deeply triggering, deeply upsetting, So what is that part in us? And we have so many parts, and it's infinite, really, all the parts that exist within. And so,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where to go from here?
Right. Yeah.
Actually, I want to rewind real quickly. You talked about men and women and having to revisit like their birth, what they've been through, and how they can go about like healing that so they can step more into, who they're meant to be, so they can evolve as a parent. Like, what are some of those things that you find that men and women are faced with, belief systems or personal life experiences? Like, I'll be open and honest right now. Like, I've never felt a calling to be a father. And for whatever reason, yes, I did have a traumatic birth. It was super traumatic. I was told I almost died during the childbirth. I was in an incubator for a long time. I was a month premature. The doctor told my mother not to breastfeed me, and a whole bunch of other stuff, not to mention circumcision and all that. And so it's like, what are these things that you found with the couples that you work with, where that they've faced, that they've dealt with, that they've had to work through to maybe take the next step,
Yeah. I mean, there's like a lot there where you just shared, Um, I don't know if you're familiar with family constellation work, systemic family constellation work, but I've been going to a lot of groups and representing there. And some people go back to the moment of their birth. I did that recently, like 5 months ago. We constellated the moment of my birth, and it was really a next level experience. And I could go into it if you guys want to talk about it. But one of the constellations I experienced was similar with a man, and he did not want to have kids. And look, like, full disclosure, not everyone has to have kids. Like, it's not like, it's so funny. There's people who are like, don't have kids, and people are like, oh, why? Or like, oh, it'll come, or it's like, no, it's okay. Like, we're good. I don't need the condolences. But
Yerasimos thinks we're overpopulated.
Yeah, totally. That's it. No, I hear what you're saying, and I'm happy that you touched on that. And I want to go back to what you were saying too, but I agree with you there. It's like, is the one formula the only formula to exist for human beings? Like I used to think something was wrong with me at times. I was like, I don't understand. And then Sophie and I, we get a lot of projections from people that like, if anyone should have kids, it has to be you two for X, Y reasons. I'm like, all right,
It's
chill.
so funny. I had that thought about you guys.
Okay. It's like, okay, chill, but like, I'm not saying that I haven't had the thought, but like, just generally I haven't. And not to make this about me, but I just want to share is that I've always felt this within me. And then I've had like multiple astrology readings and I've asked this question to these astrologers and they're like, yeah, it's not really part of your path in this lifetime. It was in a previous life, I'm not saying that I need one of these people to like, tell me how to live. But when you deeply feel something within yourself and then you get like something like an affirmation, whether it's through human design, whether it's through astrology, whether it's other systems, it's like another like, okay, cool. Like this resonates. This makes sense. Because, we're human. We can sometimes be pulled in directions, people project onto us and societal pressures and familial pressures. And so to stay solid in who you are, like takes a lot of strength. And sometimes we do need the support or the affirmation. Anyways, that was just a little side tangent, but you were in the middle of something.
I could go off on that topic as far as like exterior validation with these sources and these modalities. Like, no, that's a whole thing. But I hear you. Well, in this particular constellation that I witnessed, he was asking that question. He was like, "What? My partner's giving me a deal breaker. Like, she wants to have kids, and I just like I'm not feeling it any. Like, I thought maybe I would, but it really is not something that I want." And so he went back to like the few hours after the birth. And I thought of this because of what you shared just now with your story at your own birth. And he had a situation where he was separated from the mother. And the whole time during the birth, the mother felt that the father was not available. Like the father was not going up to bat for her, like not protecting her, not gatekeeping during this birth experience. So that was like her experience she was having, right? Imparting it on the baby, feeling abandoned by the father, like he wasn't stepping up. And then the baby was separated and alone for quite some time, like a few days. And he had these like memories and these kind of recalls of like wondering where the father was, like who's stepping in for me, who's protecting me, and it wasn't the mother and it wasn't the father. And there was just this deep sense of abandonment. And so for him, there was this fear. He accessed this. He was like in the constellation, he was like, oh, I just believe that like somehow I will not show up for this child. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to like impart that on my own child. Like something is going to happen where I'm not going to be able to show up. I'm not going to be able to protect it. And like, I'll fail, So there was this deep sense of failure that he had been living with, like on the subconscious level, that like he was not going to be able to show up because he never saw anyone show up for him in the moment that seemed to matter most for him. So I don't know. Like, I don't know what happened to him after that, but there are certain experiences that we have that create this imprint, and they can dictate the way that we walk through the world and the projected delusions that we have that we impart on everybody around us, and so he was able to access that and take ownership, and felt relief where he was like, oh, I see it for what it is now. Like no one abandoned me. Like everybody was doing the best that they could. And like, I will do the best that I can and show up, So sometimes it's just that switch that can be flipped on for people. And like we were just talking about, sometimes you just don't want to, like, it's not your path,
Yeah.
And
even though I say that, I'm always open to things shifting, up until this point, I haven't had this strong inclination, and I'm open to it shifting, so we'll see.
Yeah. And like, there's something big here too, because, like in modern dating and the way that we get together with people, there is no like discussion of core values in the first few meetings and the first few dates. People just like will connect. They will withhold in order not to lose love from the other person, so the other person doesn't lose interest. And it's almost just one version of themselves is available for the first few months. And then that other, we get comfortable and these other parts of us start coming in. It turns out, hey, I never wanted kids. Oh, you did, but now we're locked in. Now we're bonded. Now we're living together. Now we're sharing a bank account, like we get into these complications and we're just never shown how to come together with someone else and to compare core values, because most of us don't even have core values because our parents are not showing us a core value system. And so I think if we can kind of go back to that of like, what does it mean to come together with somebody? What does it mean to compare these core values, these priorities, and then see if we're a match. And if we're not, then like, goodbye,
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. And I think so many people don't know what they value because they've just taken on the values of the culture of society of their parents. And even just to have that conversation, or even to know that that's a conversation to be had, already brings you to a certain place of consciousness. And this is a subject that I've had multiple conversations with people around, even just the subject of vaccines.
Yeah.
It's just like, all of a sudden people are together for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and then they get married and then they have a kid. And then it's like, oh no, I'm not intuitively drawn to this. And then the other partner's like, no, fuck yeah, this is what we're doing. And you're like, whoa, this is a potential for such conflict, and I've seen like divorces and endings happen just on this subject alone.
Oh yeah. I mean, and of course, things change, right? Like one person in that partnership can go through an evolution and suddenly their mind is, I mean, this happened a lot during the pandemic, right? Like some people woke up to certain realities and their partners were like, I'm not with you on that.
Yep.
Deviation in the path. So like, it's possible that can happen, right? But we can do the best that we can in our adolescence or young adulthood, accessing core values. And we need the guidance to do that. A lot of us just don't, but if we can access that, and then we come together with people and we can compare and contrast and see where we go from there. But we're just so afraid of losing love. It's like, we just don't want to express like, I've heard people say, oh, I'm not going to let him know. Like right now it's too soon. I'm like, it's never too soon to have this conversation, like it's never too soon. That's how we used to do things. Now we don't really have a structure for courtship and things like that. And people are getting to messes.
We've lost touch with the reality that truth is love.
Yeah.
The highest path is always what's true. And that's the most loving path as well. It's not about maintaining the passive comfortability of this connection between us. It's what's fucking real, because only by addressing what's real can either of us tap into our potential, And do we value potential? Do you value potential? Like, to me, that's what I value most. Like, what's possible, And I always know, like, it's truth.
Yeah.
And for me, it's always been a process of whatever it is, I'm just ripping that Band-Aid and see where we land.
Yeah.
You're either here for the truth or you're not.
Either here for the truth or you're not. And like, and when we come into partnership, it's like you also have to be realistic and say, I'm here for this person. You should not enter the partnership if there is anything about them that you want to change, right? Like, you're taking them as they are, right? And that's one element of it. The other element is loving and knowing that paths can deviate, right? So you're loving without attachment. And that's something that is really challenging because a lot of us, in order to feel safe, we have to control. That's just the way that we have survived for so long. So,
yeah. And even if you start a relationship initially wanting to change a person, because I think most humans on some level, when they're engaged in a partnership, they're like, well, yeah, you could do that thing a little bit differently, or maybe you can behave a little bit more like me in that situation because of course I'm right. And it's like, okay, but can you recognize that, and can you move to a place of more acceptance of, hey, there are things that I have, there are qualities that I have, there are gifts that I have, there are ways of beings that I show that are different, and can we honor each other in our differences and maybe learn from the differences too, without this like, no, you have to tick off all these lists, these things on a list and achieve your potential future success now in the moment for me to love you.
I mean, all those things are true. The bottom line though, like the basic formula is like, if a woman, I'll speak for myself, right? I'm a woman. If the woman doesn't feel safe, like authentically safe.
Do you have your woman card to prove you're a woman, Eyla?
Is that a thing now?
I don't know.
Oh my God, don't get me started. So Yeah. So, if I authentically feel safe, I'm not going to need to reorganize him. Right. If a woman authentically feels safe, she's not going to be like, well, like in 6 months, I'll get him to start eating like this, or, telling him how to drive in traffic, or, saying, hey, you should do things like this, or you should resolve it. Like that's then going into that dark mother energy that I mentioned earlier. So if a woman totally trusts the man's judgment, there's nothing she has to change about him. People are like, oh, whoa, like, I don't know if I can do that. Well, then you're not in a balanced partnership, because if you trust him to lead you, then you can surrender and do your thing. And I know like there's so much stuff out there right now. I feel like it's oversaturated with like the masculine, feminine, like discuss. Yeah. But I'm just saying, like on a basic level, I see it all the time in the birth space. I work with so many couples. Like that's the basic formula. If you truly trust him, then like there is nothing you need to change. And at the end of the day, men really don't want to change anything about their woman. They're like, I just want peace.
Yeah, and again, like from a masculine standpoint, like each man needs to look in the mirror and go, like, well, am I doing the things for my partner to feel safe? And if not, how can I improve on that? What about my behavior is making my partner not feel safe or not trust me?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I'm working on a course right now with an incredible somatic experiencing coach. It should be out in the next 3 months. But it is all about, it's only for men. So it's all about creating, like, the questions are, ever wonder what makes you a leader? Like what makes a man a leader? Ever wonder what it would take for someone to feel safe around you, right? And all it comes down to is the man being able to hold sensation in his body, right? Expand his capacity to hold sensation. And when he can do that, like the world can be falling apart around him, right? His wife can be in a swirl, she can be in hysteria. And if he can continue to hold the sensation in his body and access his own safety, she'll naturally just like power down. But it's when he starts to mirror that hysteria, or he storms out and it's like, I can't deal with you anymore. When you get like this, right? That's when the woman, it escalates and it starts to compound in the relationship. I don't feel safe with this man. Every time that I start to feel emotional, he runs out the door. Because there isn't a capacity to hold that. And so in the birth space, this becomes very important. It's such a good preparation for fatherhood, because you have to be able, and men are not given the opportunity to ever really learn this, but in the birth space, you have to be able to hold a lot in your body and not feel like you're suppressing or you're stuffing it down. It's really just like, okay, I'm like this infinite being and I'm safe and I'm holding all of this. And I'm kind of alchemizing and letting some of it go. And no matter what happens, I'm never going to like let her down, because I've got this and I've got her, and that only comes with really finding the safety in oneself. And when a man hasn't accessed that, he can't provide that for anyone else.
Yeah. I hear you there.
I think like finding safety in oneself is merely a matter of connection to one's own vulnerability.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Yeah. I mean, I find in my partnership with Sophie, like those moments when I'm feeling grounded and I'm connected to who I am. And if she's going through something and I don't need to try to fix it or tell her she's wrong or get super defensive, which can be my go-to because of my own wounding, it's pretty amazing how there's a settling in her. And then almost right after, like, thanks for being sweet with me, or thanks for being, present with me, and it's just like, okay, just a reminder, okay, that behavior elicited that response. Okay, let's do more of that. How does that feel? Because it really is very simple. Like a woman, I can only speak from my personal experience, just wanting to be heard and wanting to feel safe. And I most of the time where positive results happen, I didn't do anything. I was just there.
Just didn't leave the room.
I just didn't leave the room. I didn't argue. I didn't try to make her wrong. I just was there.
And there are circumstances that do require leaving the room. Just as a caveat, there are circumstances which do require leaving the room.
Well, yeah, and also, like sometimes you have to leave the room in order to keep you from doing something that you would regret later as well, and for engaging in some kind of argument. Like if you don't have the capacity sometimes, like, I think you need to remove yourself from the situation, process, do what you have to do, and then hopefully both partners can come back when they're a little bit more regulated and have a discussion on what went down, what the triggers were, and come to a new understanding. And I think the repair process is super, super important, and having that somewhat quickly, but even if it's not quickly, can you come back together, and can each party, very often, because it takes two to tango, I would say most of the time, take responsibility for their role in the interaction. And I think deeper bond and deeper connection happens when that can happen. That's just been my example, my experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I'm happy that you're doing this course, and obviously, I'm a fan of somatic experiencing. My wife and I went through that training. We've had Irene Lyon on the podcast twice, with Seth Lyon as well. And I love the work they're doing. We kind of went into parenting and the nervous system in the previous episode we did. And it really is so important. Can you hold space for the discomfort? I mean, that's one of the biggest things that I think that leads people to addictive behaviors, is that they're unable to sit with whatever the discomfort or the heavy, intense sensation. And it's like they turn immediately, unconsciously for most people, to the self-soothing mechanism, whatever that is, to just not feel that level of sensation.
Oh yeah, we go into all of the like self-regulation, toxic self-regulation, right? Like vaping and porn. Like we go into like all the options available to us, right? And we talk about dysregulation too, because a lot of people talk about like, oh, what the things to do to regulate, but we don't often look at what is dysregulating us. And sometimes it's just continuing to walk into the same situation or continuing to engage with the same person. This happens in birth very often when a woman becomes dysregulated every time she goes to her doctor's office, for example, or if it's a midwife, and she leaves there being like, well, everything is fine. Like the results are fine. Like everything went well, but like doesn't actually acknowledge that there is a dysregulation happening just by engaging with that human being, and doesn't give herself the gift of finding a good co-regulator in her medical provider, or a good co-regulator in like, the team that she's electing. And that's why the blood pressure goes up, anxiety can happen. And then she's getting these like inaccurate test results if she's getting tested for certain things in her pregnancy. And it starts to create this full like web. Right. But yeah, it comes up in parenting too. I see it all the time where it's like the child leaves the infancy stage and they start to individuate a little bit more and more. And the child is expressing vocally, and parents are like, this is so loud, I can't listen to this anymore, turn it down, like. And it's like that child is now realizing like, oh, it's not safe to express, it's not like all these things that I wanted to say and all these sounds that I want to make, and like my diaphragm opening and closing is like really making the people around me uncomfortable. It's not safe to do that, and then the parent doesn't remember that when they were a child trying to sing or express, that's what their parent was telling them, because they didn't have the nervous system capacity to hold the sounds and to hold those expressions. And so we just continue to recreate that pattern with our own children, and then, oh my goodness, chaos ensues, this internal chaos.
It's difficult to hold space when a toddler appears to be having an exorcism.
Oh yeah, totally. And especially in the car when you're driving at night and you're alone in the car with like a toddler is like having an exorcism in the back seat, and it's like turn on the Enya, I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I catch myself sometimes, it's like I'm so sensitive to sound. Maybe I'm vaccine injured, I don't know. But I'm so sensitive to sound, and it's like she'll do these like high pitched shrieks in the car. She gets like excited, and I'm like, and I just start to notice like where it's landing in my body, and it's like, and she's so happy, she's like looking out the window, she's like, and she's looking at things, and I'm like, I can hold this for you. Like, let me give my little girl the gift, because it wasn't being held for my little girl. So I'm going to give my little girl a gift, and I'm going to hold this for you right now. And I'm going to like relish in your pleasure, because I would have loved it when I was 6 years old if somebody relished in my pleasure with me.
Yeah, for sure.
So I often go to that space, and I invite people to just say, whatever I'm going to give this child right now, let's imagine that it's also the gift I'm giving my little girl who never got it, or my little boy who never got it.
Yeah. What's the correlation between unresolved trauma and infertility?
Yeah, Yeah, this is someone recently said to me, like, I don't understand how she eats McDonald's and doesn't exercise and she got pregnant on the first try. Right.
Yep.
I hear that, a version of that a lot. So one of the main pieces we've been working with when it comes to infertility is sexual trauma. So there are a lot of dimensions. We can look at lineage, trauma that's occurred in the maternal lineage, for example, trauma that occurred for the pregnant woman. Then she gave birth to a daughter, and then that daughter can't get pregnant. So there are many entry points for infertility. And one of the biggest ones right now, like I said, is sexual trauma from a woman's own past, and it doesn't have to be as like severe or dramatic as one might make it out to be. It could have been consistent, unwanted touch that was non-sexual, right? It could have been something that created, that caused these kind of like gates to go up in all of the various energetic portals that a woman has in her body, right? It could have been something like that also said it's not safe. When you're touched, it's not safe. In order to stay safe and in order to move through this world, we really have to shut down. We can't vocalize, we can't open this. And when we can't vocalize, the cervix doesn't open, and there's so many energetic pathways that have been blocked. And so, when we're looking at infertility, I invite women to like take a step back from considering freezing eggs, considering IVF treatments, considering like trying another diet or going on this like program. And I asked her to consider to start looking at the trajectory of safety, like what we were just talking about, right? Like, where is she accessing safety, and does she feel safe in her partnership, right? Does she really feel that this person is going to step up for her? Is there really containment there? Does she feel safe in getting pregnant? Will she lose her job if she gets pregnant, right? Is there safety financially for her? Like, start to recognize where safety is compromised and where safety exists. And if it's not really available to you, if you become pregnant, then the body is going to just naturally reject the pregnancy. It's not going to happen. And so then we also look at the elements of, touch that occurred throughout one's lifespan. We look at the possibility that the current relationship that you're in is not offering you what you need. And so there's a checklist really to go down. And most people, after like assessing one or two of these things, start to find something there. And then they go on this path of self-inquiry and family constellation, German medicine. There are so many modalities that can assist us and guide us in this process. We're not meant to do it alone. Like, healing doesn't often happen in a vacuum. Like, there are modalities that we can call upon that give us the empowerment to then take responsibility and start taking action, right? And so it's not age, right? A lot of people think that fertility has a lot to do with age. We know now in the last 15 years that women don't ever stop producing eggs, and you do not have a finite number of eggs when you're born. You continue to produce eggs throughout your lifetime. You're continuing to produce eggs until you go into menopause and you no longer, have a cycle and are bleeding, right?
Is that another myth where it's like, oh, you're at risk pregnancy because you're 42 years old,
Oh, totally. Oh my God. Yeah. It's like when you enter your mid 30s. So like specifically age 36, some people say age 35 is when you enter the territory of a geriatric pregnancy. And that's when you're like, well, you're going to have to come get an ultrasound every 2 weeks instead of every 4 weeks because you're high risk. And it's like, well, what's the risk? Well, you're just, yesterday you were 34, now you're 35. You're high risk. So it's like that. And if a woman can get pregnant and she holds the pregnancy, there is no issue with the birth itself. So you can be 44, and you get pregnant and you have a great pregnancy. There's no issue with the birth itself because of your age. I've said this many times. I've seen women, in their early 20s get pregnant and they have difficult labors because, they're not in shape. They're not eating well. There's a lot of psycho-emotional unbraiding to do that hasn't been done. And they have tumultuous labors and they're like 23 years old, So it's like, for me, the age is just this like trauma field that we're all participating in, and even the most awake women that I've spoken to are like, write me emails and they're like, I know what you're going to say, but like, just wondering, you think I should freeze my eggs, and I'm like, no, we've had this conversation, right? So it's something, it's insidious, and it's on the mind of pretty much every woman that I know. And so no, age is not a factor. Again, it's just the psycho-emotional terrain that we've touched on so many times here, like belief systems, limiting beliefs, partnership, safety, trauma, you
Yeah.
know. Um,
Yeah, and it becomes this almost self-fulfilling prophecy where because of the story, because of like, oh, you can't have a child after this age, or it's there's so many risks to it, then that story's in the mind, and then someone does get pregnant after 35, but because that story's there, that belief system's there, and potentially there is a complication, then it's like, see, look, there are more complications after age 35 too. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
that can be the thing as well.
they were right,
It's fear projection.
Yeah, exactly. And, there is an entire industry, right, of IVF and, the overlap with pharma. I mean, it's one and the same, right? They're cousins. They benefit off of keeping the story alive. As long as we can continue to show women that they're in deficit after their mid 30s and that they need us, like we've got it on lock, and how do we do that? Like we continue to make films where like the couple's having a hard time getting pregnant because she's older, or, da da da. And like the story is just perpetuated and it's in our consciousness. So it becomes real. So
Yeah.
women not conceiving and not holding a pregnancy. And it's because that's the belief system.
Yeah. The proof in the pudding for this is like I know couples who really struggled to get pregnant for many years, and then they went the IVF route and they had an IVF child. But then for the second child, there's no issue whatsoever
Yeah.
in getting pregnant, right? Because that story is no longer there. It's like I can get pregnant. I had a birth,
Right.
and it's no issue now. Yeah.
I've seen that a lot too. That's interesting you said that, where it's like, oh yeah, like we've broken that belief,
Yeah.
There are some people who say it only happened because of IVF, that's fine, but it often happens where they get pregnant, accidentally the second time.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I never thought this could happen. Wow,
Yeah.
Sometimes they just need to feel the sensation of what it is to conceive and be pregnant in birth to know that their body's not broken, you know. But yeah, there's so much around infertility, and I've seen women not able to conceive after having a very traumatic birth, traumatic pregnancy, miscarriage, abortion. That creates issues with infertility later, not because of like, they might say, oh, there's scar tissue or there's like something like that from the procedure that was done. And no, there is like, I got a call today from a client who, she had a stillbirth with twins last year. And she said to me, I don't want to get pregnant again because I do not want this to happen again. And like, I would love so much to have another baby, but I simply do not want to relive what I lived, and she's honest about it and it's inner consciousness and she knows, but there are so many women who have miscarried or had abortions or stillbirths and it's like buried deep within. And they're just like, no, I'm trying to get pregnant and we're having a hard time, but we're going to keep going at it. And it's like, have you grieved yet?
Mm.
Have you grieved yet? Even abortions, like, have you grieved that yet? As much as like you were conscious for that and it was a decision, like grief is still in order, for whatever reason. Some people have to abort ectopic pregnancies because it could actually kill the mother and the baby. It's not possible. It's not viable to have an ectopic pregnancy. And so they have to do a procedure. And there's so much grief around that. So there's a trauma field there and it's really important to address it. So that's one of the big causes of infertility that I see is just not holding a grieving process for certain events previously.
Even like more generally, like we don't really like. I mean, I'm not a woman, but from what I can observe, like it appears as though there's a resistance to process the birth itself.
Yeah.
What actually took place.
There's a resistance to birthing in itself, just the marathon of it, the labor process, you're saying?
No, processing one's own birth experience.
Yes. Oh, there's a total resistance to it. I mean, oh, yeah, I think there's a resistance to processing the moment we were actually born, and then there's a resistance to talking about the experience we had, and like done birth processing sessions with women in their 60s who are like, I birthed 30 years ago, and like there's just something not sitting right with me still, and I want to talk about it, and I was not ready to talk about it until now. Like I came across info, or I saw a photo, or I get triggered every time people are talking about how great their birth was, and I don't want to feel like that. I don't want to die having this feeling. And so we talk about it, and they realize like, oh wow, I was duped, and
But
I'm angry.
the guilt also, where like I could have done things differently, I could have done things better, I could have made different decisions. That's a big barrier as well.
Yeah, I could have made different decisions. And that's where we also have to trust that there is like a greater divine plan that is for us, right? It's for us. It's for our expansion. It's for our learning.
Yeah.
And why can't we trust that child intelligently chose to be born that way for their own life's process?
Yeah.
For their own journey. Like
100%. What's that karmic blueprint is vital, that holds gifts when we finally get to that and address that. But it's that fine line, between, awareness, but also acceptance.
Acceptance and getting excited about the wound alchemy that can happen when you start to process this experience. I mean, I've had a host of experiences where I'm like, well, I wish I could have done that differently, or wish it would have unfolded, and really quickly I'm like, oh, I'm alchemizing this, like this wound has become a gift. And now like this and this person are all benefiting from this, and everyone has the opportunity to do that. Everyone.
Yeah. I've been beginning to become curious about my own birth only recently, because the story, which I've been told forever, it was such a rush. Like apparently, like my head popped out in the car on the way, and like there was a whole bus full of children finishing school that were watching it. And like everything was rush. And like actually, I feel rushed my entire life. Come to think of it,
everything. It explains everything.
I know.
See,
I never knew this about you, bro. Now I know. I have more compassion for you.
All this time together, and you had never talked birth stories? Wow.
Legit, everything has to happen
besides
quickly.
Circumcision. We've talked about circumcision plenty of times, but not that. Yeah. Thank you, bro. Thank you for trusting us in this moment and sharing that.
Well, I feel safe.
Yeah. No, anyways, I keep going with what you're saying. But
oh, I don't know. Now I want to know all about his birth story.
That's what I mean. I was saying to Joel, keep going. I know I jumped in and like cracked a joke, but
No, I think thanks for hijacking my very sentimental moment, Yerasimos. That's all right. That's pretty much where I'm at. That's what I know of it. Like I don't know. What can I say?
Yeah.
I don't know where that thread was going.
Well, no, but you bring up a point. Yeah. I can't tell you how attached I am to the story. Like I've heard it however many times growing up. Like I wasn't getting nutrition in the womb for some reason. My mom couldn't feel me, and then my uncle from Greece was staying with them, and he rushed my mom to the hospital, and then they had emergency C-section to get me out so I can survive.
Yeah, great. Make it about you.
No, I'm just yes, I am. I'm making it about me. We're bouncing off stories with each other, but it's just like, but even then, like for me, it's very even cerebral. Yes, I've done some work on it, but even then it's hard. Like I know I had an experience in my life where it was like there's this deep vulnerability and almost like hunger. Like I couldn't even talk. Like I wasn't getting nutrition, or I'm hungry for something, or I need sustenance and like I feel that way sometimes, and I think when you get to the root of a deep addiction, sometimes it's like it's needing some level of connection or sustenance that you didn't get, or safety, I guess, and you're searching for it. But I don't know. It's like to go back to what I said is like it's still cerebral for me, and I mourned it. I mean, I've had experiences where I think like in different healing sessions where I've connected to it, but it still remains pretty like, oh, well, yeah, this happened to me. I'm a victim, but how do I move beyond that? I mean,
haven't you seen that like the entire experience that you're offering the world now, like has everything to do with having lived that birth?
Yeah. I mean, that's why I don't regret it, because it's like, everything that's happened to me in my life, and even all the early surgeries and the ear operations and the things that I had as a child, I think on some level, like led me down this path, but yeah, it's interesting to think about.
Yeah. There have been studies done that I should be posting soon, but basically children who were not held, right, who were not worn by their mothers, like in carriers regularly, were not receiving that oxytocin on a regular basis that they needed in order to feel safety and bonded, right? And so they're finding a correlation between babies who are often in strollers and contraptions not being held as much, or they go into daycare really early, like around 3 months, are more prone to addiction, right? I mean, like it seems obvious, like it makes sense, right? But it's like we don't even realize that even when we're trying our best, and even when we have the baby with us, like the way that we're even present with them and engaging is also affecting them, so it's never ending, like a baby could have never been held and a baby could just be there next to you, but then you're not engaging. It's like we're just a society that's not really set up to offer them what they need for that fulfillment, and so that's why I'm just like, wear your baby and like go on with your life. Do not complicate it. Just have them there with you as much as possible, You don't get that time back.
Yeah.
You really don't.
Yeah, I tell mothers, just be like a kangaroo, just have that baby close to you all times. Right, Joel? You're aware of kangaroos. That's where you come from.
I heard something about that in Australia. Is there like a season where they're like hunted and weeded out because of the
kangaroos are considered pests in Australia,
right.
Like massive, like overgrowth.
Wow.
Yeah, like but it's a common, people eat kangaroo steaks and stuff all the time. Like it's common.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I guess gators. That's like gators here in Florida.
Look at that. You got a new bit of information they didn't know. Amazing.
This is the descent of Here for the Truth, guys. We had a good run, 109 episodes. Now it's talking about.
It was all about the kangaroos. How dare Yerasimos bring up kangaroos?
Now Yerasimos is dismissing my birth story and talking about kangaroos.
Yes, I don't know what went wrong.
I'm actually acknowledging your birth story, because feeling rushed. It's interesting experience.
In my constellation with my birth, I mean, I knew my birth story, but I got to relive it recently. And, I started developing this theory as like my own case study over the last 10 years of the women that I've worked with and talking about their birth stories. And my mother medicated herself at the last minute, basically. It was like right before, maybe like an hour before I was born. She received a saddle block, which is like an old school epidural where they just directly inject the fentanyl into the into the cerebral spinal fluid rather than having the mother on a drip. The epidural is like a threaded needle that goes into the cerebral spinal fluid and it's just like taped there and it's on a drip. But these used to be just like single injections you'd get every hour or so. And because of that, I was pulled out with forceps, which are these long metal clamps that kind of go around the baby's head and guide the baby out, but really they get dragged out, get dragged out, yanked. Yeah. And so, there's a lot of injury that can come with that as well in the upper cervical spine, but that's another topic. So in this constellation, I saw very clearly that this desire, and I don't know, I mean, I think this is like a generational epidemic, but it's like this desire to give up when things become really challenging and not knowing what it is to really fight to be born, not, being dragged out, not really doing that myself, has definitely impacted my capacity to stick with things, in certain aspects in my life. And I started to kind of see this across the board with, children who were dragged out rather than born on their own volition. And
the same thing with the C-section as well. Yeah. I've had this exact conversation with people and have thought about that same thing that you said, and not going through the birth canal, not pushing through, not fighting through. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not a fight like in this negative sense.
Mhm.
It's a really beautiful initiation of fighting for your life. You're fighting to be born, and it is the process that gives you all of these markers to then have that quality, over the rest of your life. But it's like over the course of your life. And so I saw very, very clearly where that has impacted me. And after experiencing that in the constellation, it changed a lot. It started to reverberate out in the web that is my existence with people in my nuclear family, even, because our belief systems are reverberating consistently into our nuclear family, into our systemic family constellation. So when you do this work on yourself and you take radical, self-responsibility, you're also giving that gift to the people around you, so this isn't just like for your own process. This is like for your children and your lineage after you and before you. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Like, how does someone go about doing that work? Like, that was where I was going with it initially. Like, how does someone do that work? Like, sure, family constellation, sure, might be one option, but
yeah, that's definitely one option, and if that's not accessible, to someone, there are lines of inquiry that you can pose for yourself, questions like, when I think about birth, I feel, what are all the things that you feel like on a really basic level? What's coming up for you? I imagine partnership, when I imagine parenting, when I imagine, and you really do this kind of like limiting belief exercise where you first isolate what it is that you feel when you imagine these scenarios. And then you start to ask yourself, what would it look like if that wasn't the truth? Like, what would it actually look like for me if, birth wasn't hard? What would that mean for me? And what are the parts of me that want to believe it's hard? And what are the parts of me that want to know it's easy? And then we can start to do this, like what's parts work, right? Where we start to access the different dimensions of ourselves that have different beliefs and give them a seat at the table. And you don't need anyone on the outside to guide you through this. You can just start saying, oh, there's a part of me that believes this. What does she need? What can I give her so that she stops like scratching at the door with this belief system?
Opening the dialogue.
Yeah, just opening the dialogue with all the parts of yourself.
Yeah.
So that can be, something that you do on your own. You don't have to like go to a facilitator.
Your dreams too. Once you open that line of inquiry, what's happening in your dreams?
What's happening in your dreams, right? Simply asking, show me what I need to see.
Yeah.
And, whatever higher power that you associate with, just show me what I need to see about this.
Yeah.
And if you're paying attention, you'll start to see.
Yeah.
It'll be shown to you. So,
well said.
Yeah.
What's that weird question that we were gonna? What's the weird question we were gonna ask her to end the talk? No. I just really have been enjoying this conversation, and it's so important, really, because I know we touched on it earlier, and it's corny to say, but the children are the future, but they are, and I think individuals that can do the work that they need to do to be as healthy as they can, obviously not perfect, there is no perfect, but to help nurture and bring regulated, healthy children into the world is what's going to have an impact on society and how we move forward. So all this stuff is so important.
Yeah, and we have to not forget that like we don't get hyper focused on just the child's experience. That's not what this is about. This is also like focusing on our own experience and unbraiding that, because that's going to naturally impact them. Like there's actually very little to do for them. But if we start to unbraid this, then they just feel that and they fall into place around it.
Yeah. Self-healing is so important on so many levels.
Yeah.
What would you like to leave our audience with? Any final message? And also, how can they contact you? How can they discover and pull this thread deeper for themselves in terms of, educating themselves further?
Yeah. I mean, there are various offerings on my website. Courses, this course that's coming out for men, and creating safety for yourself and for others around you. There's the master class. And so I just encourage anyone who, whether you want children, don't want children, you're pregnant, not pregnant at the time, like this course really gives you a deeper understanding. This journey gives you a deeper understanding into how we came to be and how birth plays a role in every area of our lives. And ultimately, are we practicing informed consent, in our partnership? What does that mean? And in the world itself, in the way we consume, like, are we practicing informed consent? So it's really like a beautiful deep dive into how to move through the world in a way that feels authentic and loyal, to ourselves. And then, of course, I'm on and off Instagram from time to time. So I'm there, and I love connecting to people that way as well. And what I would say to everybody is, like, meet yourself where you are, and give all of these parts that we've been talking about, all these parts of yourself, a seat at the table. There is no there's no hierarchy in our parts. All the parts have a completely valid and worthy expression and experience. So just give all those parts of yourself, the shame, the pride, the grief, all of those parts, give them a seat at the table and see what they tell you, and come into that wholeness. That's real self-love, I think.
Couldn't agree more. I'd like to purchase one of those men's courses for Yerasimos, so I'll get in touch later.
Thank you. Thank you for the gift. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, bro.
Happy to give you a promo code for that.
Nice.
Eyla, thank you so much for this conversation. I really think we tackled things from a different perspective, which is nice. And yeah, thank you for being who you are. Thank you for playing the role that you do. We honor you. We appreciate you. And to everyone that's listening, thanks for being here too. Wish you guys the best. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean. Fast forward in evolution to a place where we can share our confusions. Yeah, 450 BC, I'm sharing tea with confusion.